We're live on YouTube and
Cool.
Twitch. Hello, friends.
Yes, we're just a little late today.
I mean, we're kind of on time,
On
if
time?
anything, right? Like we're usually
I don't
super,
even know
super,
anymore.
super late.
Yes, and yes, relatively, we're on time.
Yeah,
How's it going? How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? I'm
I
tired.
I'm doing well. Yeah, we were talking before. It seems like this week has kind of blown by, and yeah, we're both kind of just ranting on random things.
Yeah, and I'm highly
But
motivated.
we're live.
So the United States plays uh US soccer, world football
Yeah, football. Yeah, right, right.
tonight at
America.
7 p.m. Pacific, so 10 o'clock Eastern. And the thing that's cool about that is one, we're already going forward, so we win or lose doesn't matter. But two, we have the opportunity to be the first team in our World Cup history. So for America, that could win all three games in the group. So for folks who aren't familiar, you play. We're playing three different teams in a group. There's four teams in a group. Whoever wins in that group, you're the group winner. You move on. If you don't win or come in second, there's some opportunities to move on. It's a whole thing. But it's pretty rare to win all three of your games. Usually there's a draw or a loss. So it'd be really cool. It's a cool milestone. Um, and it should be a fun game, I think, because it's on one hand, like it doesn't matter because we're moving
Mhm.
forward. So you want to balance that strategy with, we don't want to tire everyone out or get people hurt. On the flip side, anyone who's going to be on the pitch is going to be like, I want a record, right? I want to quench
Mhm.
the like three
Uh,
wins
uh,
in the US team history franchise. So it should be a fun game. It's against Turkey, who, sorry, Turkey, you're not very good. Better luck next time. But you never know how these things go, right? There's a lot of games that have been on that not really sure how it happened, but it did.
Yeah, yeah. I really don't have any. I'm not a sports person, although sports
Yeah.
psychology is very interesting. So the
Yeah.
comment you made about people like the game result doesn't really matter, but there's something
No.
bigger here at stake, which is potentially being
Well,
record holders,
in
right?
in
So
the North America is hosting it, right? So we have, I think, four sites of the like seven or six or
mm,
something, and there's a couple in Mexico, maybe a couple in Canada, and then there's like three or four in the US. Um, so that's cool. Like we're kind of the host country, I think. Um,
right.
and so it's a big deal, right? You want to win at home, like not to get anyone's hopes up or to crush the team, but like the US very rarely makes it anywhere near the final, just historically. So, that could be very different this year. I hope we do good, but like just for folks who might not know anything about soccer or what the rest of the world calls football, we're not generally very good on the world stage. So we'll see.
Nice. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm motivated for that. I'm excited. I love football. I'm really okay. I got a gripe for anybody who's a footballer. These fucking hydration breaks are killing me.
What can you
So
elaborate? What
so
exactly?
historically and generally in most matches, you play 2 45-minute halves plus or minus a few
Mm,
minutes for overage or stoppage. Um, if you're in some kind of a competitive championship, usually there's like a shootout at the end where you just try to take goals
mhm.
to determine the winner if
Yeah.
you're
Right. Right.
tied,
Yeah.
or you just draw. And I believe the FIFA World Cup precedent got set when they were in Qatar, and the UAE. I think was last year's. Or I forget if it was in somewhere in the Middle East. I thought it was in Qatar, but it could have been other places too. But it was so hot and so dry, right? Because it's hot and dry there.
Sure.
They instituted hydration breaks, and they do that in the states too. In our soccer football league is a little bit different than Europe, but like we'll do those too because we have like places like Arizona and like even LA sometimes just gets wretched, and
Mm,
the idea is like player safety. The problem I have with them is that they're like now pretty much a given, like roughly the half time in the half. So about what 25
quarter
30
away.
minutes
Quarter
into
away.
the
Yeah.
half, and then again in about 60 minutes in the second half. And so the part of the strategy is endurance, right? And so it kind of really breaks the endurance game. And then if there's a lot of
Oh,
momentum with one team, either, doing really well or starting to recover, it breaks up that
got it.
momentum.
Right.
Yeah. And so what I'd love to see is that they be optional and they be officials' discretion. And so it's like you may or may not get one, so you can't really plan for it. But if it is really hot and shitty or people are like passing out or whatever, the official has an opportunity to like, give a break.
Only when people are passing out.
Yeah. Well, and like, and then the players, so, like hydration. So it's water, it's not water. They're drinking Gatorade and like salt, potassium drinks, all that kind of stuff. Which whatever, that makes sense because you don't wanna cramp up, but, like, they have ice packs they're using and a lot of the players, and so it's like it's gotten to be
Hmm.
this more of, like, and, like, for anyone who's never ran, like, 12 miles in an hour and a half, uh, that little bit of cooling or that little bit of liquid can really, really change, like, you want to run a little bit harder now, or there's a couple big
Hmm.
plays and you don't get as exhausted or as tired, or your body has more time to recover. So you have more performance, over the whole period of the game instead of getting tired towards the end or trying to save yourself to the end, which again, it's a strategy, right? So I don't know. I don't want people to get hurt. I don't want people to get like, dehydrated problems, but it's also really, really fundamentally changed the game. And I got to gripe publicly for all the Americans who have no idea what I'm talking about.
Got
It
it.
it sucks. Like, I don't like it.
So to be clear, you don't like it because it changes the nature of the game, not so much that they're trying to protect the
Yeah,
players.
and
Just to be clear.
it's bullshit, right? So it's like, and because it's
Yeah.
every game, game in Seattle, what is it? I think it's Friday or Saturday. Like, we're supposed to have, like, unprecedented cold temperatures. So
But they're still gonna have a hydration break.
but I think
Well,
the
I
reason they
mean,
did that is so then every match is equal. So every match has 2
right, right.
hydration
Yeah, that makes
breaks.
sense.
But it's like, it totally changes the nature of the game, and I would like to see it, or, like, if the temperature is above, like, 32 or something like that, where it starts to get really warm.
Hmm.
32 degrees Celsius for folks is approaching, like, 80,
Hmm.
I think, if my
Yeah,
math's
it's
right.
about 80. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, I
it's
mean,
like,
I don't know too much about the sports industry, but isn't there something with this idea of maybe this is something that we might get into, but is
yeah.
it FIFA or the some sort of organization kind of has like full control over how these games are
Yeah.
set up and played and right? Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and it's one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, so,
Okay,
like, that
that's what
that's
I didn't want to
yeah.
say it by going. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess I probably got banned for life, but whatever, I'm not gonna pay, like, 7 grand to go to a football game, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll gripe on that too. I think it's insane the prices for these tickets, and, like, the idea that you can live in, like, a state or even a city where the match is, and it's not anywhere close to being approachably affordable for folks is crazy. Like,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, that happens with music concerts too, right? Like, yeah,
yeah.
people from yeah.
And
Mm.
the FIFA this year, I think is different than the last World Cup, but they control the sales cycle. So you like never take
Yeah,
custody of
right,
the
right.
ticket. And so then they get buyer and seller fees on both sides of it too, which is insane.
Mm.
I don't want people to get ripped off. So I think having that system makes sense, but they should not be making massive fees. Like I was looking, I found last minute tickets to the game in Seattle, which is the closest mega city I'm by, and there were $750 tickets, which were already bonkers for a sporting event. And I was like, it's w- first time in 30 years we're hosting it. We might not ever host it again. Like, probably will be another 30 years. It's in my backyard. Fuck it. Right. And then I went to check
Mm.
out and it was somehow like $7,000. And I was like, I don't know how this got 10x more expensive in 2 clicks. I don't even care to try to figure out why. I am like, I am totally done with this. So if you're not at the game or think the pricing is outrageous, you're not alone. And I would say definitely find a watch party. It's way more fun to watch with a bunch of soccer fans in a public setting than at home. It takes a little bit of getting used to for a lot of American folks. It's a very different game. It's the action comes in spurts. It's not continual. It's very dissimilar to most American sports. It's more probably similar to baseball in that regard, where it's like not a lot happens, and then all of a sudden something happens and the game can radically shift. So I don't know. Now it's the sports stream. Throw
Well,
a
I mean,
little
I was
box
trying to
in the
tie it
corner
in,
and we
like
can.
sports in general. I think there are questionable. I don't want to say economics because I don't know if you can call them economics, but the
Yeah.
way that a lot of these major sports events are structured, because most of them are typically monopolies, right? Like they are events
Yeah.
that they're held,
Well, they
and
have
they're
a
sort of
monopoly on the stadium or the venue, and
right,
it's owner operated.
yeah,
There is no, you can't just spin up a sports team. And like, I don't know if people even know this, like the NFL, right? The quintessential American Football League. You cannot actually, it's a private company.
yeah, yeah.
And I can't just make, Andrew's awesome
A football
football
team, right,
team
right, and
and
then try and
compete. They
join.
have to vote to approve me.
Yeah,
But we give them all these public subsidies to build stadiums and to move players and all this kind of shit. So that's a whole thing. It's interesting because I think this actually segues really well into what we were going to actually
you
talk
caught it.
about.
You caught it.
I
I was
know
throwing
you
it to
just
you, man.
threw me the softball.
I was trying to alley oop it to you.
Yeah. But and so that's a whole thing. But I do think like there was an antitrust thing about sports tickets or Ticketmaster, I think specifically. And Ticketmaster does the same thing. They like either own the venues or own controlling interest in all the venues, the big venues in America. And then you have to get a Ticketmaster ticket. And then they do surge pricing and all this crazy shit to extract them. And this money does not go to the artists. This money does not go to the performers. Most of it goes to the company. It's just like Uber and Lyft. Most of the money you pay doesn't actually go to the driver. It goes to the company so that they can have a really cool headquarters and cater lunch for their employees. Like it doesn't
And
go to
ping
the
pong
actual
tables.
person doing the work. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I am not against if that money is given disproportionately to the people who are actually creating the value. Awesome. And I don't think facilitating a digital ticket is creating a ton of value in 2026. The thing that I don't like about it, and I'll call it SeatGeek on this too, because this is who I have to deal with most of the time. They forbid you from taking a ticket. I can't even like, I guess I can technically send it to somebody, but like it's
Mhm.
almost impossible to actually have a private sale of the ticket. So
Resell.
I have
Yeah,
to
yeah,
list it
yeah.
on their platform. They charge
Mhm.
me a fee to sell it, and they
Yep.
charge a buyer a fee to buy it.
Mhm.
And that is the most like scammy, anti-competition, monopolistic feature I have ever encountered in this country. And it's like it's just getting worse like that. But that's a huge problem. And it's again, if it was going to the players, maybe
Yeah.
okay, but like it's not.
Yeah.
I think there should be a cap on what people make too, like not necessarily like an income cap, but like the idea that you can just charge whatever you want is insane. That there's market economics because there really isn't. Um, but we haven't been able to solve it and grapple with this, and it's directly related to all this tech AI hysteria that we're seeing.
Mhm.
And how is it related, you ask? Great question. The headline this morning was Apple's prices went up 20% on MacBooks and iPads. Interesting, it didn't hit phones, which is their like number one
Not yet.
cash
Yeah, not
cow.
yet. Yeah.
Well, I think they're going to raise them a little bit. I think they're going to really cut like what you get up, and they're not probably going to have a massive hardware bump to try to keep the prices stable, or they're going to really, really bump the pro models to outrageous prices, and they'll keep the other models more affordable.
Yeah.
Uh, but the purported reason for this was like, Apple was trying to shield us poor customers from these high prices that AI is causing, and they just couldn't bear it anymore. And they're, 37 point something percent margin went to 39% margin last quarter. And so while
Yeah.
they were shielding us, they made like 2% more margin on their products. Poor them. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it was about that. So that's nonsense. It's PR. It's bullshit. Apple's a multi-trillion dollar company, I think, in market cap at this point, or at least well healthy trillions.
Mhm.
They're fine. They can eat a 20% hike for a long time and be totally fine. But I think so 20% is a lot. And I think that was my number one shock was that, a few percent here, a few percent there. Some companies have kind of ratcheted stuff up gradually, and like there's pros and cons for both pricing strategies. I've been in these conversations. I'm sure you have too. But I think it's better to do smaller bumps more frequently than a massive bump like that, because it creates its own shock, right? You're like, oh shit, this thing that used to be 20% less, and for folks like Apple hardware, you're talking a few hundred
Yeah, twenty
dollars
percent
to a
on that.
few
Yeah,
$1,000s
yeah,
of increase. And
right.
a lot of people have opinions on Apple products that they're already overpriced. They're actually they were pretty fairly valued for what you get. They're
Yeah,
definitely on the more premium side, but in compared to, like, the performance, the engineering, like, objectively, like, they're actually pretty comparable to what you could get in the market. A comparable chip would be like was it the AMD AI 395 Max
oh yeah,
Plus or something?
right, the
System on a
new
chip.
chipset. Mhm.
Yeah, it's similar design. It's not as good, frankly, but it's a similar, uh, system architecture, and it's roughly, you know, similarly priced. I would say I wouldn't say roughly the same, but similarly priced. And that's where we're going, right? We're going with CPUs and memory being embedded and even storage embedded on the same controller, because the only way to get high speed throughput and low
Speeds,
power is to
low
make
link,
things really
low
close
latency link.
and
Yep.
right and not plug into anything, because the socket systems have a lot of electronic interference basically, and there's a whole other bunch of shit, right? And so the reason then that this stuff's getting more expensive is because they're more complex to design. It's a bigger actual physical die. So the thing that, how do you explain dies for folks? The that used to just kind of be the CPU, the RAM, and the memory and the storage were all kind of separate components made of chips. You plug them into a big motherboard, and that was that. You might
Mhm.
be able to upgrade them, you might not be able to. Putting all those components on the same actual, circuit board per se, uh, is
Physical form factor or something. Yeah,
yeah, and it's much more expensive, but the when you build an actual chip, there's only so many chips you can build at a time. If you think of like a pizza, right? There's only so many toppings you can put on that pizza. You can stack them, but even then they
challenge
start falling
accepted.
over and falling off, right? I mean, you can do that with chips too. And so you can make the pizza bigger. The problem with doing that with chips is that you get more errors and you get less good chips. So there's a physical size problem with reliability. And so and you're also there's also like other reasons, but you're stuck kind of
Physics.
with
Their
physical
physics involved.
constraints. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so you now, instead of being able to get 100 memory chips on your pizza, now you can get, 30 CPU and memory chips on your pizza. And so there's always trade-offs. And so Apple's kind of moved that direction. Other companies are moving that. There's pros and cons. And so why is this expensive? Why is AI the cause? Well, I'm not well, AI has been purported to be the cause.
You gonna
uh,
corroborate that?
I'm going to qualify it in a second, but AI is being blamed because of the massive amounts of memory that GPUs are needed to train inference systems, to serve up the model, to store memories, to run all the tools and shit in the background. And the same memory chips that are in those GPUs and those servers are
Mhm.
the same memory chips that Apple would use in their system, are the same memory chips that Sony uses in the PlayStation, that Xbox uses, that
Basically
Nintendo,
all your
right?
hardware that has a
Yeah.
computing chip has the same, yeah. Mhm.
And there's different kinds of chips, but the reality is there's really only two places or two factories or I guess two companies in the world, and a handful of factories that actually make the core components to make a chip. And that's the problem, right? The
Mm.
problem is not necessarily AI. Like, they've put a bunch of futures on purchasing. They've done a lot of guaranteed purchases. They've done a lot of promissory purchases, have driven the cost of these components sky high. But the problem is it's a monopoly, right? There's more than two memory companies, but there's two main ones that are, I think it's 97% or 96% of the entire world supply. And they're booked out for like 3 years
Mm.
to companies like
TSMC and MS. ASML?
They make
Just in general.
they make the dies,
Mhm.
but the full package memory assembly is Hynix, XK Hynix, and Micron.
Oh, you're talking memory. Yeah, Micron. Okay.
Yeah.
The
So
memory
yeah, you
in
have to
general.
make the
Got it. Okay.
chips and then you assemble them. And then if you have to put them in a die because you're doing these CPU memory packages, that's a whole nother process. Um, but yeah, so there's two companies that kind of make this. Samsung's the other big one, but I think they're like 2% or something, like 1%. It's just a
Mm,
minuscule amount. And like they sell to themselves. Like they sell to other companies too, but they're like it's vertical. Um, so the fundamental problem is that there is a supply constraint, but it's not a supply constraint brought on by demand per se. It's a supply constraint because the monopolies are not building more productions because they know that these things are fabs are really expensive to build, assembly plants are very expensive to build, they take forever, and the cyclical nature of technology is boom and bust, up and down, and so they don't necessarily want to invest in it. But the reality is there's like no little mom and pop fab that could be like pumping out, memory chips for Apple, or you get 20 mom and pop fabs to bring in that supply or change their production. It's just really two big companies. They're doing massive scale. So Apple's kind of cornered the market on these for a long time. They've guaranteed purchases in the future, that kind of stuff. But now Nvidia and other companies
mhm.
are just throwing money at them, and so they're going with the highest bidder to some extent, and it's really just upset the entire dynamics. And so if you don't use Apple, you're probably like, I don't really care. Well, the problem is memory chips are literally in every digital
Are all
device.
everywhere. Right. Right.
Your alarm clock probably has a memory chip,
For flash memory, sure. Yeah. I
right?
mean, I think that was the like you said, it's not necessarily demand per se, but I think the more interesting, I don't know, maybe business angle is it really was what you said. They're going with the highest bidder. So if you can
Yeah.
only produce X many chips in your consumer market, which is like your average person here, and they're buying a laptop or some hardware device versus those hardware device manufacturers like the big names like Apple, uh, why am I brain farting at the big companies that are trying to build this hardware, right? They're going to
Dell,
pay you more
HP,
for.
Nvidia.
Yeah, I was hesitant on mentioning like Dell because I didn't know if they're still in the game, but I guess
Yeah,
they
no, they're
are.
still in the game. They've doubled down on AI stuff. I can't really speak to any of it. I mean, I know
Yeah,
they're in
yeah.
it.
I mean, I think the split is like consumer hardware versus like the big companies that are building the consumer hardware, but also have other motives for buying that RAM, which might
Yeah.
be like going towards AI compute or AI inference or something like that, right?
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Normally, I wouldn't disagree, but I think for technology, there isn't really a difference between professional and consumer for most stuff. Like, yes, servers have different processors and memory, but a lot of the core components are very similar. And even like when you look at GPUs, up until the HBs in the what 3 generations ago, NVIDIA chips that were designed to be either racked themselves or part of integrated chassis. Those chips that you were getting in a high-end server GPU were a higher memory bandwidth or a higher memory version or a
yeah,
higher
mhm,
core count of a consumer. And so they were really
right.
just selling the consumers like the shit that wasn't good enough to make the cut
Yeah,
for the
right,
server
right.
market for the enterprise. So it was kind of discard in a sense. And like it was not totally discard, but it was kind of that way. And same with Intel for the longest time. A lot of the Pentium, I think it was the
Yeah,
Pentium
the server
fours
chips that
were
they were
actually
making,
just
right,
Xeon rejects.
right.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but
But that's what I meant, like the consumer
yeah,
grade hardware, which was like if you can only manufacture so many chips, you're going to allocate more of that resource to building the chips that net you a higher return
and
than
I
if.
think the additional rub on this though too is like not all memory is the same, right? And so like the
Correct. Yeah.
HB memory, the high bandwidth stuff, which is what the GPUs really need, is I think effectively 4 RAM chips, DRAM chips stacked together essentially,
Oh, I need to do my
to get
research
the
on this. Yeah, I don't know
yeah.
the manufacturing process for like things like
Yeah,
DRAM
so
versus
don't quote
regular
me on it, but and
DDR4 RAM.
it's yeah, it's a little different, but my understanding is like each module that sits on an HB chip is like a stacked chip design for 2 memory modules, and then they, logic them together to
Sure.
create the high bandwidth for so you have like I think it's a
Mhm.
4-channel read write versus like a single double with the DDR spec. I don't get into hardware that much anymore. I don't have to deal with it. I just, AI
Yeah.
stuff, but so it's a totally it's more intensive raw materials, I guess is how I would probably put it. So that's part of the problem too. And so like instead of being able to make, 3 iPhones out of those chips, now you can make like 1 GPU and no
Mm.
iPhones. And so it's kind of a resource problem. But the reason that we're here is because we don't have a diversity of manufacturing for memory or chips. We don't have any supply uh, slack, right? These things have been
Yeah.
operating at
Yes.
massive, and like even during COVID, like there was a massive dip in it, and then everyone started buying TVs and computers and video game systems and everything else, and there was a huge demand. So instead of trying to build to level out the demand, then now we're here, right? We have zero slack capacity. It takes 7 or 8 years to build a new fab. It's crazy. And there's no sign of anybody even caring at this point. Cause like if you look at the numbers from like SK Hynix, like specifically, like they're not really investing in like new facilities. I think they're building one in the States, but
Yeah.
that's been kind of planned for a while. And again, 7 years from now, great. One, if we're really going to AI the world, and I'm not saying we are, but if we believe the hype of these companies, we're going to need, several orders of magnitudes more production to meet the supply need. And again, people are getting all pissed off about AI. It's not real because we can't get the electrons for the data centers to operate. So just like cool down. Like it's not real. But if it were
Well,
real, this supply constraint also is a linchpin, right? Even if we could figure out how to build all the transformers and bullshit to get all the electrons in the data center, which we can't. It's another similar problem. The memory stuff, the CPU stuff, it's just the none of the supply chains are there. And so there's kind of a massive push to try to fix all this stuff, but it I'll pause. I feel like you have something to say.
well, I mean, I think you made good points, and these were things that I wanted to bring up as well because you mentioned it takes like 7 or 8 years to build one of these fabs, right? So there is this element of pace layering where the
Mhm.
supply for things we want to do right now versus the time it actually takes to get there, there's a time lag because again, we live in
Yeah.
a physical world while these concepts of AI demand or what have you are almost instant. So people don't necessarily have that capability to plan quite correctly when it comes to how things are going to change versus what we currently have as infrastructure. And if you want another example of this, I work in energy, so you look
Yeah.
at the energy grid. The energy grid is so old, but all this demand is shooting up now, and it takes decades to build the infrastructure that we need to move the energy around.
Yeah.
So it's not something new. Um, but one other thing I wanted to mention, we kind of do this on 3.8 is we don't undercut the difficulty of things. Building a fab is difficult, and
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why it takes so long to build one up. Is because it's very very hard and it's very costly to build these types of things. So like
Yeah.
the upfront effort and someone wanting to think about how to actually get this off the ground is already a barrier enough to not want to do it. So that's an additional flaming hoop to jump through when we're talking about building supply chain for these types of
Yeah,
things that we want now.
that's a good comment because like the point I was going to kind of steer us towards is that it is hard, but we're not we're not building for the future. And I think that's the
Yes,
biggest problem I
sure.
have with this in that instead of building more capacity to build like the nuts and bolts, we've decided we're going to build like assembled beams. I don't know what the analogy is.
Yeah.
And what I'm really concerned about is that this push now will be that compute is relatively affordable today or recently. I mean, I'd still say it's pretty affordable, but it's getting to be not affordable. The concern I have is that compute is going to become no longer a commodity or on the commodity track, and it's going to become a scarce resource that only a few people with money can interact with,
Mm.
and that's a huge danger. And so folks have made this argument with AI, and I think it's hyperbolic and kind of overblown, and this stuff's going to get cheaper and it's going to be more readily accessible. But if you can't run the model or you don't have the hardware to compute the model, it doesn't matter. And then the folks who do have the compute have no pressure to do anything, right? And so it's kind of like what Apple's done on the iPhone is that they've closed it down and made it a lot harder for people to develop software for. So that ecosystem now requires a level of specialization that you used to not have to have. You used to be able to just kind of tinker around with software, kind of, and everybody I know, I'm old now, but everyone that I know, like I learned how to code, with the exception of a very few amount of people, were just like, I was on my computer and I was like, I wanted to do this, and I figured out how to make it happen. Can't do that
Mm.
on the iPhone. And so, and there's trade-offs, right? It's more secure, it runs better, I guess, like better battery life, whatever you want to call it.
I guess.
Right, but
Yeah.
but it's less open, and the more
Yep.
abstractions you get away from that, and it's less accessible. And I'm very
Mm.
concerned with the I'm not concerned with AI becoming um, a scarce resource at this point. But if hardware
Mm.
continues to become ridiculously expensive and unobtainable by average people, or
Yeah.
just people without money, frankly, like I guess if you have money, it doesn't really matter. Now we've lost an entire pressure mechanism to keep the AI companies that are well capitalized in check or provide alternatives for people who don't want a
Mm.
cloud. And there's a lot of, like, if you are full AI company is fine, but there's a lot of instances where running a model in a cloud makes zero sense. And like edge compute, as we call it, is going to be completely and totally unobtainable if the trajectory we're on keeps
Right.
going.
The costs. Yeah. 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 That's
And the other thing, if you still don't give a shit, um, anything that runs software off your computer, aka the cloud or SaaS, is going to become more expensive. The hyperscalers, as we call them, Amazon,
mhm.
Google, Microsoft,
Google.
there's a couple other players. They need to buy servers, and they can buy them at large scales, but everybody's so focused on AI that that means the website that your company runs is going to get more expensive. The website that your favorite product runs on is going to get more expensive. That service that moves the data from your phone to another phone or allows you to connect with other people runs on a server that's going to get more expensive. And so we're going to see an inflation in all digital goods. We're already starting to see a little bit of it, but it hasn't hit anywhere near where it's going to be yet. And I'm not trying to like doom and gloom, like this is real, it's going to happen.
Mm.
We can check
That's a good
back in a
point.
couple months. But the concern I have there is that software has been largely deflationary, meaning it's gotten cheaper and it's made things more accessible for the most part. I think we're going to see a massive spike the other way. And what I hope is that it's just a spike and then it becomes deflationary again. Observing what I'm seeing and just kind of the nature of the world right now, and the winner take all capitalism is all that matters. It seems like it's just going to be an excuse to continue to charge more and further monopolize tech stacks and compute as a resource. And
Mhm.
that means it's less accessible to everybody and just gets more expensive.
Yeah. I mean, the optimistic lens here is scarcity is often a driver of innovation, right? So maybe there's I don't know if you'd call it like a revolution of sorts, but oftentimes we use more compute than we actually really need, right? So if I go back to the
Yeah.
days of the early stage video games, they had limited hardware, which meant that they can do limited things, and out of it
Yeah.
came Mario and these great works of art because they were resource constrained. So maybe that's
Yeah.
where we also had
I
one
mean,
of the
maybe,
directions we went.
but like the reason the personal computer revolution and video games, all this stuff kind of happened was because you had these mostly Japanese manufacturers of chips and diodes and capacitors, and they just flooded the market with this shit, made it really cheap, and you could go to an electronics store and build your own
Radio
board to
Shack.
do stuff, right? Yeah, literally Radio Shack, right?
Yeah.
I don't even think they
Yeah.
sell anything that doesn't come in a box now. And, for folks, those are the basic components of electronics,
Yeah.
and you used to be able to literally just go to a store and buy them or get a catalog, and you can still today, but the thing I'm afraid of is that everyone will be chasing these massive money deals, and then they'll either spin down those
Mm,
businesses, or they won't be able to compete, or it just won't make sense for them to even supply, and then they're just gonna push it all to the big suppliers, and then we lose a massive chunk of the electronics market. We've already lost a massive amount of the electronics market. And, for folks to say, well, it just gets better. Well, maybe, but I also don't want companies making decisions about what I can and cannot compute, how I can and can do what I want. That's my take
mm,
on, kind of the floss free and open source model, open computing standards. Like, the reason we have the internet is because people were able to, like, get under the hood and be like, I want to make it go faster, or I want to make it do this thing, right? I want to add 6 wheels instead of 4. And now it's getting to the point where you're not going to be able to do any of that, and we're going to lose innovation, and we're going to continue the monopolistic track. And, like, this is a very well studied phenomenon in business. This is not take Andrew's word for it. We know monopolies are really bad for everything,
mm.
and they eventually fail. It just takes a long time sometimes, and I'd rather not see that happen. But here we are
Well,
on
you're
the
not
track,
blessed.
right? Like, yeah, no, it's we don't learn that from the history. It's really like the last time we had massive consolidation like this was the oil industry, and it was, Standard Oil and Co. became
Mm,
massive monopolies on energy distribution, and people are like, well, energy is too expensive because there's a couple companies that run it all, so we're going to change that. But we're celebrating that there's only a couple companies that run AI and run technology, and that's a good thing somehow. And I don't think that's a good thing. If you want to use those
mm.
companies, great. But I think you should have the option to not use those companies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, AI is already making technology stuff, I think, hard to get into because it's so easy to be able to do stuff. That, to your point with constraints, if you can just have AI do the stuff, put in the work to try to really figure out that problem to make it
Mm,
better. Maybe if AI is more expensive or less usable, then you will. But if everybody's renting their compute from the cloud provider and they don't allow that, or they don't allow you to modify stuff, then we're not going to get the next level of innovation.
mm.
All right, happy Thursday.
I was gonna say- I'm trying to think of an optimistic note to end it on, but yeah, we're living in some
I
crazy
I
times.
don't
But
think it's optimistic, and I think there's a big push in our society for positivity. We've talked about toxic positivity, and it's like, I don't think we need to spin it. I think it's really dangerous, and I think we need to make corrective action, and we need our representatives and senators here in the states to have policies that enforce antitrust, that enforce diversity of thought and um, ways of doing things, even if it's not the most efficient. We have this push for all efficiency, but sometimes non-efficient ways yield different results in ways that we couldn't predict. And we need to invest in those types of things and encourage people to start up businesses and stuff. And I don't without doing that, it's just going to be a slow slide. It's just already a slow slide in my opinion, and it's only going to get worse. And so this is
yeah,
kind of maybe a wake up call to folks to be like, I understand AI is like a love or hate thing for a lot of people. That's a huge problem because it's like a binary. It's like
right.
following in
Yeah,
American politics.
extremist. Yeah.
Like, it's not good or bad, it's how we use it. Like everything else, you have to get out of that mindset, and you need to be pushing your representatives and folks in Congress to enforce antitrust laws. This is the same thing for social media. This is the same thing now for these AI companies are starting to suck
Mhm.
up all these other competitive companies that are either improving ways to make models more efficient because they need it. And so then that takes away the ability for someone to self-fund a lab or to tinker with your own. You can train a pretty decent sized model on, $500,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but in like,
I was waiting for either the hardware spec or the amount of money.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can train like a decently sized, like usable model on a GPU in your computer, depending on what you're trying to do and how
Would take,
specified
yeah.
you're trying to get. But like these general purpose models, like, you know,
Mm.
$500,000, $1,000,000 gets you a really, really long way. And that's only possible if that compute is available or people
Is it
have the
right, right,
ability
and affordable, right.
to leverage other technologies. And so it's if the companies that are building the AI are sucking up all of the other companies that are contributing to that ecosystem as well, then there isn't an ecosystem for everyone else to build and learn and build on. It's the same thing with like internet providers, right? If there's one company in your town who owns all of the lines in the ground, then they set whatever price they want and you get crappy speed or you get crappy service or the internet goes out all the time. If you live in an area like I do, I have 4 ISPs to my door.
Wow.
I have gigabit fiber and I think that's like $45 a month. That might sound like a lot for some people, but like that is like I know people who pay hundreds of dollars a month for the exact same
Mhm.
service.
Yeah, yeah.
And if my provider of choice here decides to raise their
You
prices, I
got
can
some
go
other
to
ones you can go to, right?
3
Yeah,
other
yeah.
ones if I want. But I guess plus cellular, so I probably have 7 or 8 ISPs. That's very rare for
Jeez.
most people have like 1 or 2 options, right? So,
Yeah.
but the point is that if you don't have a bunch of different options and people trying different things, so it's like, okay, everybody is an ISP, great, now what? Well, you figure out a way to bundle email, and that was like the big thing back in the day, right? You get an email account, you get 50 gigs of space or 10 megs or whatever. And then, filtering and like all these, some people, especially more technical people are like, yeah, it's all bullshit. Yeah, but for some people that's valuable. But that's
Yeah.
competition, right? It's breeding other ideas, and those ideas clearly didn't pan out because I don't think any ISP offers email or it's like a Gmail or something now, right? But and things change and that's okay. But like we would have never gotten like the fiber technologies we have if we wouldn't have had
Mm.
competition and like the cable companies for a long time, and this is we're like way out, but we're in competition land. The cable companies for a long time were locked in physics. You can only transmit so much information on a copper wire,
And
and
yeah, no, yeah, right.
with light pulses, you can transmit more. But then somebody figured out, well, we can do all sorts of different weird things with frequencies and transmit, I think it was like 8x more information on the
Mm.
same copper wire. So there was an innovation spike where it was like, this is unacceptable. We have to be able to compete with fiber. We can't just rerun cable everywhere. And ta-da, right? So I think like the way out of it and the optimistic way is to enforce competition and enforce different
Mm.
ideas and support different ideas. So again, if you're mad that Apple raised their prices 20%, there's all sorts of companies you can buy computers from that aren't Apple.
Mm.
Right now with AI, there's the big three American, and then there's the big three Chinese companies. France has one.
Mm.
There's a lot of interesting projects that are starting to crop out of
Europe,
Scandinavia
I think
specifically,
so. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
where people are starting to get on this idea of we can't just let Google and Anthropic and the other company make all the decisions and the advancements, and we need to invest in this too, which is great.
Mhm.
But if we don't have access to run those models ourselves or in uh, communal ways where we could all get together and start a company to build some AI thing, then it's all kind of moot in my mind too, because you're still at this high dollar institutional investor. And then for people listening, well, yeah, it's a new technology. That's how it is. Great. But the costs or the means of production for this are being artificially inflated in cost. And that's the fundamental problem I have.
Interesting. I don't know if I'd say artificial, but they're definitely being inflated.
It's artificial because there's a monopolistic control over supply, and there's an artificial demand spike. Like the AI companies have committed to build billions of dollars and billions of chips and all this nonsense, but the reality is they can't even rack it in a data center. It's all fake.
Well, I mean,
Well,
it's
it's
not
90% fake.
the
They're building some data centers, but
but
the
the
amount
demand is still there. The demand is not artificial,
is it
right? Like
it's an artificial demand if they can't
Yes.
actualize it, right? It's a non it's a it's a non-committed demand. So they have a promissory note to say, I'll
Non-committed.
probably buy this amount of stuff from you given all of these conditions being true. That's not demand, that's fake because Apple probably could buy all the chips to make a bigger computer. They've actually had to limit their hardware options because they don't have enough memory. Right? So like they're actually selling products. The AI people are selling an AI product and they're having to create servers and data centers and shit. Those aren't real because we can't power them. We can't build them fast enough. We can't connect them. Like there's all sorts of other problems. We're solving them, but like I think that there's been like 300 and some data center proposals and the reality is we can probably build like 20 of them
Hmm.
because of just like you literally if you could build the building and put the servers in, which you can't hook them up to the grid for power. So, okay, great. You have a building sitting full of NVIDIA boxes that don't turn on. That's not demand, right? Because they're not going to buy those boxes if they can't turn them on within a reasonable amount of time because they're just going to buy the next one that comes out. So they've created by basically like promissory notes of purchase artificial demand spike on the market. And some of it, the demand is real, but and some of it is probabilistic demand. Like if we could put these all in data centers, we would, but there's so many other dependencies that it's not real.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm getting semantic because the demand I think is real. Whether you can actually deliver on
Right.
whatever you're going to do with the demand is not.
Right.
That's a
But it's
different
not even
question, right?
it's like a futures market problem. So if I'm trading future contracts, which really quick and simple is
Oh,
the
jeez.
yeah, but no, this futures markets were designed for this problem and they're not being applied to this problem because they're I don't know, there's a whole that's a whole podcast to get into. But
Well,
for the
because they
futures
don't deal
market,
with physical goods, right? They don't deal with delivery on future on physical
but what's a
goods. So
chip?
like,
What's a server? What's a power unit? That those are all physical things that they've promised to buy with a bunch of
mm,
conditions attached, right? That's so for the futures market, so for folks that kind of maybe get in the frame here, the when you have crops and you're growing stuff, you grow an acre of crops and you expect to get an acre of corn, let's say. You may or may not get an acre of corn because the flood or burning crops or whatever, right? Too
yields not
much rain,
100%.
yields,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Yeah.
You decide not to sell half of it, right? And so people can place futures on those to say, in 6 months, I will pay this much money for an acre of corn,
X amount of
10
right.
bushels or
Yeah.
whatever, right? The thing with that is that futures contract obligates you to take receipt of what you purchase. There's more stipulations. There's some other things in there, and value can materialize. But effectively, that's what it is. This is not that, and the AI companies are trying to sell everybody that that's what this is. They are saying that we will buy 10 million GPUs if we can build these 6 data centers, and these 6 states give us the power and environmental waivers, and there's all of these dependencies that sit on these promises. But what's happened then is that these companies are booking out all of their production, the future production, based on
Mhm.
fake promises that probably won't materialize. And maybe they will, maybe they won't. Andrew says they won't to anywhere near the capacity that people are speculating on. Maybe I'm
Mm.
wrong, but the reality is the market based solution for that is futures, and that's not what's happening. And it's a little weird in most manufacturing circles to book out production that far in advance.
Mhm.
And like it's a contract like everything else. I can say,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not going to buy it. And that's why that is the primary reason that these memory manufacturers don't build excess capacity, because they know there's a dip coming. They don't know when it is, and they'll just make the chips anyways because there's people to sell them to. And because there's an artificially short supply because they refuse to build more capacity and there's no other players in the
Mm.
market, they could do that. That's the problem I have.
Mm. So wait, so where does it go from there though? So even if you can't deliver on these on this artificial demand, or the whatever you want to use as artificial demand for,
Yeah.
there will, like you said, naturally be a point where things stabilize in terms of
Well,
prices for
but
memory.
the prices for stuff have been bid up artificially so
Yeah.
high that I don't think there is, because the prices are artificially so high and there's no demand curve correction because there's no new supply being built, that I don't think the
Mhm.
prices will correct anytime soon, because the primary bidders for the chips are competing with other people, and there's secondary contracts that say, if you end up with, extra capacity, we'll buy it at this price. Well, that price used to be, you know I don't know, 20% of what the actual, contract would cost, and it's kind of a futures contract, and
Mhm.
it's almost an option to purchase chips if somebody else pulls out. And that used to be not really a premium. Now it's a premium product, and that the cost of those secondaries, if you would, are now also astronomical. So let's say a RAM chip costs $100, I contract you for 2 years at $100 of chips, and I'll buy X amount of chips. You come to that same supplier and say, I'll do a contract for, $90 a chip, and I'll pay you, $10 up front
Mhm.
for that ability to, if Andrew can't make them, or can't get rid of them, or can't sell them,
Yeah,
or
the
maybe
option,
Andrew
right,
then will
right.
sell them to
It's
me,
the
and there's
option, you're
all
paying
this
for the
weird
option,
shit,
right?
right? But the problem is, because this is a private market, because there's no market economics at play, and there's no more importantly, there's no external competition. They've bid up these prices like totally out of control. And like, this sort of stuff used to happen in agricultural and other commodities markets, which is why we have futures and why we have all these other market based. It's like, I guess maybe one of the solutions would be to have like the price of chips traded. I don't know what that would look like. I have not actually thought anything about it, but it's like, why not? I guess if I can trade grain, why can't I trade DRAM?
Hmm, that would be an interesting world.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think the reason that doesn't work is because there's two companies that produce 98%
That
of the
would, yeah,
supply.
yeah.
And if there were more companies, then you could get a consortium of smaller companies together, and they could say, look, we're going to go to the market, and we're going to, you know, have a futures price for
Mm,
the product that we're producing. And it's risky for us because we might, lose some money, but realistically, we probably won't. And then everything would commoditize. Maybe. I don't know. We're in market theory now, and I guess I haven't really thought about it. So like, don't.
yeah, I was gonna,
It's a thought
I mean,
experiment.
all I was gonna say was, "Yep, well, we know what your next business venture is."
I know, right? Big DRAM. But anyway, like, and I don't know, this gotten quite technical for folks, but fundamentally, again, it's the lack of competition is yielding higher prices, which is always what it
Yeah.
does. But we're in such an artificially inflated market space right now, and these AI companies have come in so well capitalized and bid up stuff so expensively that it's the same kind of thing that's happened to the housing market. It's like
Mm,
one person comes in the neighborhood and pays $1 million for $100,000 house. Now all of a sudden everybody's $100,000 house is worth 180.
mm.
And then someone else comes in and pays 220 or
Yeah,
250 for it
yeah,
because
it
they
just keeps
really
going
want a
up.
house, and so now everybody's goes up, and eventually it gets to the point now where like no one can really afford to buy a house because it's just
Mm,
too expensive, and nobody can afford to sell their house because there's nowhere else to move, because you need to sell your expensive house in order to buy another expensive house, and any profit that you would have gotten in that ownership
it goes towards
is gone,
the
right?
deal
Because you
making.
had to
Yeah,
buy
yeah,
it at a
yeah.
higher rate. And
Mhm,
this is the same kind of we're stuck in, right? And like that, the
mm,
housing thing is a whole nother thing too, but it's the same type of idea. And what we've kind of like what we talked about last stream is we've seen the previous generation take every little bit of slack out of the market and create and allow for the creation of all these monopolies to happen. And now we have to go through and de-Rockefeller ourselves like we did back in the day, and make rules
I
about
like that.
antitrust and break up
Mm,
Standard Oil, aka big AI, into
yeah.
smaller companies so they don't have an outsized market position. And for all the free market people listening, it's not a free market if you have a monopoly.
Mhm.
You can argue about who changes it. If it's the government or a private corporation, like the, SEC, gets spun out like the FCC or something. But like once you've accumulated so much capital in a capitalist system, it doesn't self-correct. It runs away. And
Yeah.
we used to understand that problem and we used to curtail it. And now we've just been like, well, if it's going to run
Mm,
away, why don't
it's
we
gonna
all
work.
get a little cut in it and then we can all run away together? And it's like, that's not how it
Yeah,
works
ride the
either.
waves. Yeah, yeah, ride the waves.
All right. Well, that's
Yeah.
my rant.
It was a good one. It was, yeah, I think there were 3 points where we were supposed to end the stream, but
Yeah.
it's a good one. You're passionate about the topic, so, um,
Well, yeah. And the headline I saw, is just, uh, you know, poor Apple trying to protect us poor
mm.
consumers from his massive price.
That's what the media
It's an
does,
over
yeah.
$1 trillion company. Like, and I get it from their business. They can't just take a hit either because then their share price goes to the tank
Mhm,
because, they lowered their margin. And nobody
yeah,
knows. And I think part of the problem with this problem too is like nobody knows when it's done. Like usually like the last time we had a massive electronics supply strike was the floods. I think it was in Korea and Indonesia, where all the hard
mm,
drives were made.
mm,
There's like this
mm,
one
mm,
valley and it's like 80% of the hard drives in the world were made there. So all the storage, like a couple factories got blown out or whatever. And everyone was like, oh shit. And then prices like tripled over a couple weeks. And then it took like 3 years for them to normalize.
mm.
So, like, if you could say, like, "Oh, no, the factory got wiped out and it takes 5 years to build a factory," or whatever the math is, you can be like, "Okay, in a couple years, this will probably," but, like, there's seemingly no end in this race because it's not grounded on anything fundamental. It's grounded on everybody's speculation and hype, and so it's impossible to predict when it will crap, but it will. It'll 100%.
Mm,
Right? It's 100% a bubble, but nobody ever knows when a market bubble or a correction happens. But
until it
but
actually
there's
happens.
but if there's fundamentals, like
Yeah,
you can kind of understand, you're like,
you can see
this
it.
feels like a bubble. But when there's no fundamentals, there's no facts, there's no data that anyone's driving on it. It's just all made up and no one knows.
Mm,
But physics is physics. The laws of reality are eventually gonna, and we're talking about physical goods, we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about physics, moving atoms and electrons. Like it will correct. It has to.
mm.
Like it's the law of the universe.
What a place to end. It's a lot of the universe.
Is that happier for you?
I think we took a roller coaster ride, but we got somewhere.
You really wanted to end on a positive note. I think that's as positive as I could get.
No, I was looking for a positive note to end on. Didn't necessarily mean we would find one, but
All right.
we got somewhere.
Happy Thursday.
Yes.